The car had not even stopped moving when I felt it. Something was wrong at home. I had spent 3 months away, closing a deal that almost got me killed twice, and every mile back to my own house should have felt like relief. Instead, my chest was tight before I even opened the door. My name is Damian Cross. Men fear me. Men respect me. Men do exactly what I tell them to do, because they know what happens when they don't. I built that fear with my own hands, over many years, brick by brick, until my name alone could empty a room. But nothing I built prepared me for what I found that night. I told no one I was coming home early. Not my driver, not my brother, not even Elena, my wife. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to walk through that door and see her face light up the way it always did, and forget for one night that I was a man other men were afraid of. The house was dark when the car pulled up, except for one light in an upstairs window. That was strange. Elena never left that room lit. I stepped out of the car and told my driver to leave without waiting. I wanted to walk in alone, quietly, and catch her by surprise. The front door was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. In my house, doors are always locked. Always. I have men whose only job is to make sure of it. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside, and the second wrong thing hit me immediately. There were cars in the back driveway that I did not recognize. Not one, but 3. I stood in my own hallway, listening. Voices came from the kitchen, low and careful, the kind of voices people use when they don't want to be heard. I recognized one of them right away. It was my brother, Marco. His voice was tight, almost pleading, and that alone told me something serious was happening, because Marco never pleaded with anyone. I moved closer, staying in the shadow of the hallway. I could hear pieces of the conversation, broken words that did not fit together yet, but each one landed like a small stone in my stomach. I heard the word hospital. I heard the word records. I heard someone say, "We cannot let him find out like this." Find out what? I stood frozen, my hand against the cold wall, my heart beating faster than it had in years. I have faced men holding weapons without flinching. I have sat across tables from people who wanted me dead and kept my voice steady. But standing in my own home, hearing my own family whisper about me like I was a stranger, made my hands shake for the first time in a long time. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. The room went silent instantly. Marco turned first, and his face went pale, the color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. Beside him stood 2 people I did not know, a man and a woman, both dressed like professionals, both holding folders they immediately closed and tucked under their arms. "Where is Elena?" I asked. My voice came out flat, controlled, the same voice I use in business meetings when I already know someone is lying to me. Marco opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at the 2 strangers, and something passed between them, a silent agreement not to speak. That silence told me more than any words could have. "Upstairs," Marco finally said. "But Damian, wait, let me explain first, before you go up there." I did not wait. I have never waited for anyone in my life, and I was not about to start in my own house. I walked past him, past the strangers, and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my mind racing through every terrible possibility. Was Elena hurt? Was she sick? Had someone come after her while I was gone, trying to reach me through the person I loved most? The hallway upstairs was quiet, too quiet. I passed our bedroom, the door open, the bed made and untouched. I passed the guest room, empty. Then I reached the door at the end of the hallway, the one room in the house that had always stayed locked, the one room Elena had told me, months ago, not to worry about, that it was nothing, just storage. Light spilled out from under that door now. I could hear someone moving inside, soft footsteps, careful and slow. I put my hand on the handle and felt it turn easily. Not locked. Not tonight. I pushed the door open. Elena stood in the middle of the room, her back to me, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding herself together. She turned when she heard the door, and the look on her face was not surprise. It was fear. Not fear of danger, but fear of me seeing something she was not ready to show. Her eyes were red. She had been crying, maybe for a long time, maybe for months, in this room, alone, while I was on the other side of the world, thinking only about business, about money, about power. I looked past her, into the room itself, and my breath caught in my throat. The walls were painted a soft yellow. There was a small crib in the corner, still wrapped in plastic, never used. There were tiny clothes folded on a shelf, tags still attached. There was a wooden rocking chair by the window, and on that chair sat a single stuffed animal, worn at the edges like someone had been holding it recently. I did not understand what I was looking at, not fully, not yet. But my body understood before my mind did. My legs felt weak. I reached for the doorframe to steady myself. "Elena," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this room?" She did not answer right away. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between grief and guilt and exhaustion, like she had been carrying a weight for so long that she no longer remembered what it felt like to put it down. Marco appeared behind me in the doorway, breathing hard from running up the stairs. "Damien," he said, "please, come downstairs, let us talk properly. This is not how you should learn about this." "Learn about what?" I said, turning to face him. I looked between my brother and my wife, two people I trusted with my life, and I felt something cold settle into my chest. "What have you all been hiding from me?" Neither of them answered. The silence in that small yellow room stretched out, heavy and unbearable, and I understood, in that moment, that whatever truth was waiting for me, it was going to change everything I thought I knew about my own life. I looked at the crib again, still wrapped, still new, never touched by a child's hands. I looked at the stuffed animal on the chair, soft and small, and impossibly sad in that quiet room, and I looked at Elena, standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, unable to meet my eyes. "Someone needs to tell me right now," I said, my voice shaking with something I rarely let anyone see. "What happened while I was gone?" Marco stepped further into the room, glancing at Elena as if asking permission for something. She gave a small, tired nod, barely more than a movement of her head, and closed her eyes. "Damien," Marco said quietly, "there is something you need to know about the last 3 months, something none of us knew how to tell you. And I am sorry, but it could not wait any longer." I stood in that doorway, surrounded by walls painted for a child who was never coming home, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Whatever was coming next, I knew, would not just test my patience or my temper. It would test everything I believed about my marriage, my family, and the people I trusted to stand beside me, no matter what. I closed the door softly behind me, shutting out the hallway light, and turned to face my wife and my brother, ready to hear the truth, no matter how much it would cost me to hear it. We sat downstairs in the living room, the three of us, Marco pacing near the window while Elena sat beside me on the couch, close but not touching, like she was afraid I would pull away from her the moment she started speaking. The two strangers from the kitchen had left quietly, taking their folders with them, and I had not even asked who they were. I had bigger questions now. "Start from the beginning," I said. "Leave nothing out." Marco stopped pacing and looked at Elena, waiting for her permission again. She gave him a small nod, and he began. "It happened about 6 weeks after you left," he said. "Elena was almost 4 months along. She had not told you yet, because she wanted to wait until you came home, to tell you in person, to see your face when she said it. She wanted it to be perfect." My chest tightened. 4 months along, I did the math in my head, counting backward, realizing that Elena had been carrying a child the last time I saw her, standing in the doorway as I left for the airport, and she had known then, and she had said nothing, because she wanted to give me a moment of joy instead of a phone call with bad news. "There were complications," Marco continued, his voice lower now. "Something went wrong very fast. She was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. I was the one she called, because you were unreachable, in the middle of negotiations, and your phone was off for security reasons. I got there as fast as I could." I looked at Elena. Her eyes were fixed on her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "Why didn't anyone call me?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me the moment it happened?" Elena finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I asked them not to," she said. "I begged Marco not to tell you. You were in the middle of the biggest deal of your life, Damien. Men who wanted you gone were sitting across the table from you every single day. If you had left that meeting to come home, if you had shown any sign of weakness or distraction, It could have put you in serious danger. I could not let that happen. I could not lose you and the baby in the same week. Her words hit me harder than any threat I had ever faced. She had been protecting me, even while she was breaking apart inside. She had lost our child alone, in a hospital room, surrounded by people who were not me, because she believed that telling me the truth would put my life at risk. I lost the baby that same night, Elena said, tears finally falling freely down her face. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was not anyone's fault. But I could not stop blaming myself, and I could not bring myself to say the words to you over the phone, from thousands of miles away, when you could not even hold me while I said them. The room was silent except for her quiet crying. I felt something crack inside my chest, something I did not have a name for. Grief, yes, but also guilt, heavy and suffocating, because while my wife was losing our child, I was in a boardroom talking about money and territory and power, completely unaware that my world had already changed forever. "Why did you keep that room?" I asked quietly. "Why keep it exactly as it was?" Elena wiped her eyes and looked at me directly for the first time since I had walked into the house. "I could not bring myself to take it apart," she said. "Every time I thought about emptying that room, packing away the crib, folding up the clothes, it felt like erasing that our baby ever existed at all. So I left it. I go in there sometimes, just to sit, just to remember." I reached for her hand then, finally, and she let me take it, gripping it tightly, like she had been waiting 3 months for someone to hold on to. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "I should have been here. I should have known." "You could not have known," she said. "That is exactly why I did not tell you." Marco cleared his throat, and I looked up at him, remembering that this conversation was not finished. "There is more," he said carefully. "Something happened after that night, something involving the business, and I think you need to hear it too, even though the timing feels wrong." I straightened, some of the grief in my chest making room for a different feeling, a colder, sharper instinct that had kept me steady for years. "What happened?" I asked. Marco hesitated, and that hesitation alone told me this next part would be harder to hear than the last. While Elena was recovering, he said, "And while you were still overseas, some of our people started asking questions. Questions about leadership, questions about whether you were still fit to run things, especially after word got out that something was wrong at home and you were not even aware of it." "Who was asking these questions?" I said, my voice going flat and cold again. Marco did not answer right away, and in that silence, I understood something was very wrong. I looked at my brother, the man I had trusted since we were children, the man I had made second in command over every operation I controlled, and I saw something in his eyes I had never noticed before. Not guilt exactly, something closer to ambition, carefully hidden, carefully controlled, but there all the same. "Marco," I said again, slower this time. "I had to keep the operation running while you were gone, Damien. I had to make decisions. Some of the men started looking to me for direction instead of waiting for you, and I did not correct them, because someone needed to hold things together. I was not trying to take anything from you. I was trying to protect what we built." I stood up slowly from the couch, releasing Elena's hand, and walked toward the window, needing distance, needing a moment to think. "Protect what we built," I repeated, "or protect your own position while I was too far away to notice? That is not fair," Marco said, his voice rising for the first time. "I have been loyal to you my entire life. I sat by Elena's hospital bed when you could not. I kept the business from falling apart while you were negotiating deals that could have put your life in danger. And this is the thanks I get. Questions the moment you walk through the door?" I turned back to face him, my calm cracking just slightly at the edges. "I am not accusing you of anything yet," I said carefully. "I am asking questions, because that is what I do, and because tonight, I have learned that everyone in this house has been keeping secrets from me for months. So forgive me if my trust is a little thin right now." Elena stood as well, moving between us, her hand pressed gently against my chest, a gesture that had always calmed me in the past. "Please," she said softly, "not tonight. We have both been through enough tonight. Whatever is happening with the business can wait until morning. Right now, I just need my husband." I looked at her, at the exhaustion written across her face, at the pain she had carried alone for months, and I let the tension in my shoulders ease, just slightly. "You are right," I said. "I am sorry. Tonight, none of that matters." But even as I said the words, even as I pulled Elena into my arms and felt her shoulders finally relax against me, I caught Marco's eyes over her head, and something in his expression told me this conversation was far from finished. There was more beneath the surface, more than a grieving wife and a brother trying to hold things together. I could feel it, the same instinct that had kept me steady through countless difficult years, whispering that somewhere in this house, in these months, I had missed. Something bigger than grief had been growing quietly in the dark. I held Elena close and said nothing more that night, but my mind was already working, already turning over every word Marco had said, already planning to find out exactly how deep this went. Whatever secrets remained in this house, I intended to uncover every single one of them, no matter what it cost me. The next morning I woke before the sun. Elena was still asleep beside me, her face finally calm for the first time, in what I imagined had been months of restless nights. I slipped out of bed quietly and made my way down to my office, a room at the back of the house, where I kept records no one else was supposed to touch. I sat down at my desk and opened the ledger I kept locked in the bottom drawer, the one that tracked every payment, every deal, every transaction connected to the business. I flipped through the pages slowly, looking for anything unusual, anything that did not match what I remembered authorizing before I left for my trip. It did not take long to find something wrong. There, in the middle of the ledger, were 3 transactions I had never approved, each one signed with my name in handwriting that was close to mine but not quite right, close enough to fool anyone who was not looking carefully, but not close enough to fool me. Someone had been forging my signature while I was away, moving money through accounts I had not authorized, and whoever it was had been careful enough to make it look almost convincing. My hands were steady as I studied the pages, but my mind was racing. Marco had access to this office. Marco had access to my signature, my accounts, my entire operation while I was gone. And now, sitting alone in the quiet morning light, I understood that his story about protecting the business might have been only half the truth. I closed the ledger and sat back in my chair, staring at the wall, trying to decide what to do with what I had just found. Part of me wanted to walk straight up the stairs, wake Marco, and demand answers immediately. But another part of me, the part that had kept me alive through years of dangerous decisions, told me to wait, to watch, to gather more information before showing my hand. I spent the next 2 days doing exactly that. I told Elena I needed time to process everything, and she gave me space, understanding better than anyone that I needed to think in silence sometimes. I used that time to quietly reach out to people I trusted, people who had worked for me for years and had no reason to lie. The first person I called was Daniel, a longtime associate who managed our warehouses and had no connection to Marco's daily operations. I met him at a small coffee shop across town, away from any ears that might report back to my brother. Daniel looked nervous the moment he saw me, glancing around the shop before sitting down. "It is good to see you back, boss," he said carefully. "We heard you were still away for another week." "I changed my plans," I said simply. "I need you to tell me what has been happening while I was gone." "Everything. I already know some of it does not add up." Daniel hesitated, stirring his coffee slowly, clearly weighing how much to say. "Marco has been running things different," he finally admitted. "Not badly, I want to be clear about that. He kept everything moving. But he started making decisions without checking with the usual people, moving money around, meeting with men we do not normally deal with. Some of the older guys did not like it, but nobody wanted to challenge him while you were away, and things were already tense." "What kind of men?" I asked, leaning forward. "New investors," Daniel said. "At least that is what Marco called them. I do not know their names. I only know they came in fancy cars and left with folders full of paperwork. It happened 3 times, always late at night, always when most of the crew was not around to see." My mind went immediately back to the 2 strangers I had seen in my kitchen the night I arrived home, the man and the woman with their folders, the ones who had gone silent the moment I walked into the room. I described them to Daniel, and his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "That sounds like them," he said. "I never got their names either. Marco kept that meeting very private. I thanked Daniel for his honesty and told him to keep our conversation between us. He agreed without hesitation, clearly relieved to have said what he had been holding on to for weeks. As I walked back to my car, my thoughts were spinning faster than I wanted them to. Marco had not just been holding things together in my absence. He had been building something of his own, quietly, carefully, using my name and my resources to do it. That evening, I returned home to find Elena waiting for me in the kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands, her expression softer than it had been in days. She had clearly slept better, eaten better, and some of the color had returned to her face. Seeing her like that, even briefly at peace, reminded me why none of this business mattered as much as she did. "You look like you have something on your mind," she said, setting her cup down and studying my face carefully. I sat across from her at the table and told her everything: the forged signatures in the ledger, the mysterious investors, the strange meetings happening behind my back. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "I did not know about any of that," she said quietly when I finished. "I swear to you, Damien, I had no idea Marco was doing anything like this. He has been kind to me these past months, patient, helpful. I never suspected he had another purpose." "I believe you," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "This is not about you. This is about him, and I need to understand exactly what he is planning before I decide what to do about it." Elena squeezed my hand tightly. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever he is doing, he is still your brother. And brothers, even ones who make terrible choices, can be dangerous when they feel cornered." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. I knew she was right. Marco had grown up beside me, had learned everything I knew about loyalty and strategy and survival, and if he had truly decided to move against me, he would not do it carelessly. He would do it the way I had taught him, patiently, quietly, until the moment was right. Over the following days, I continued gathering pieces of the puzzle, careful never to let Marco suspect how much I already knew. I watched him closely during our usual business meetings, noting how he spoke to certain men with a familiarity that suggested new alliances forming beneath the surface. I noticed how quickly others deferred to him, how easily they had grown used to taking his direction, instead of waiting for mine. One afternoon, I decided to test something. I called a meeting with several of our senior men, the ones who had been with the family the longest, the ones whose loyalty I had never once questioned. I wanted to see, without asking directly, where their loyalty truly stood now. I arrived early and watched them enter one by one, greeting me with the same respect they always had, but something in the room felt different, tense in a way it had never been before. When Marco walked in last, several of the men glanced at him first, almost instinctively, before turning their attention back to me. It was a small thing, barely noticeable if you were not looking for it, but I was looking for it, and I saw it clearly. I kept the meeting focused on ordinary business, discussing shipments and schedules, giving nothing away about what I had discovered. But throughout the conversation, I studied the room carefully, cataloging every glance, every hesitation, every moment where someone seemed to be waiting for Marco's approval before agreeing with something I had said. By the end of the meeting, I understood the scope of the problem far better than I had before. This was not a small betrayal, a single mistake made under pressure. This was something that had been growing steadily for months, a quiet shift in loyalty that had spread through my organization like a slow illness while I was too far away to notice the symptoms. That night, I could not sleep. I lay beside Elena, listening to her steady breathing, thinking about everything Marco had built behind my back. I thought about the ledger hidden in my desk, the forged signatures, the strange investors, the men in my own crew who now looked to my brother for direction instead of me. I thought, too, about the nursery upstairs, still painted yellow, still holding a crib that would never be used. I thought about how much pain Elena had carried alone, how she had protected me from truths that might have distracted me at a dangerous moment, and how Marco had used that same absence, that same distraction, to build something entirely different, something that had nothing to do with protecting me, and everything to do with protecting himself. The next morning, I decided it was time to confront him directly. I could not continue watching from a distance, gathering fragments of evidence while pretending nothing had changed between us. If Marco truly believed he could take what belonged to me, he needed to understand, clearly and without any doubt, that I was still very much in control of my own life and my own business. I called him and asked him to meet me at the old office downtown, the one we rarely used anymore, away from the house, away from Elena, away from anyone who might overhear what needed to be said. He agreed without hesitation, his voice calm over the phone, giving nothing away. As I drove to that meeting, my hands steady on the wheel despite the storm building inside me, I thought about everything that had happened since I walked through my front door only days earlier. In that short time, I had learned about a loss I never knew to grieve, and a betrayal I never expected from the one person I trusted most beside my wife. Whatever happened in that office, I knew our relationship, whatever remained of it, would never be the same again. I parked outside the building and sat in my car for a long moment, gathering myself, preparing for a conversation I had never imagined having with my own brother. Then I stepped out, walked toward the entrance, and pushed open the door, ready to finally hear the truth from the one person who had been avoiding it the longest. Marco was already there when I arrived, sitting behind the old desk like he owned the place, a cup of coffee in front of him, his jacket hung neatly over the back of his chair. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment neither of us said anything, the silence stretching between us like a rope pulled tight. "You wanted to talk," he said finally, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "So talk." I did not sit down. I stood near the door, arms crossed, studying my brother's face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness. I found none. Marco had always been good at controlling his expressions, a skill I had taught him myself, years ago, back when we were both young and learning how to survive in a world that showed no mercy to the weak. "I found the ledger," I said simply. "I saw the signatures. I know they were not mine." Marco's face did not change, but his hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, tightened slightly. "I was going to explain all of that," he said calmly. "There is nothing sinister about it, Damien. I had to keep operations moving. I did not have time to fly across the world every time a decision needed your signature." "That is not what I am talking about," I said, my voice hardening. "I am talking about new investors nobody recognizes. I am talking about meetings held in secret, late at night, in my own house, while my wife was recovering from losing our child. I am talking about men in my own organization who now look to you before they look to me. Explain that, Marco. Explain all of it, clearly, right now." For the first time since I had known him, my brother's composure cracked, just slightly, a flicker of something uncertain passing across his eyes before he forced it back down. "You want to talk about explanations," he said, his voice rising. "Fine. Let me explain something to you. While you were gone, chasing deals on the other side of the world, I was the one holding everything together here. I was the one Elena called when she was scared and alone in a hospital room. I was the one who kept our men calm when rumors started spreading that you were losing your grip, that maybe it was time for new leadership." "New leadership," I repeated slowly, the words landing heavy in the quiet room. "Is that what this is, Marco? Are you trying to replace me?" "I am trying to save what we built," he snapped back, standing up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea what it was like here, Damien. No idea what pressure I was under, trying to keep everyone loyal, while you were unreachable for weeks at a time. Those investors, they came to me because they saw an opportunity, a chance to expand into territory we have wanted for years. I took that opportunity because it was good for the family, not because I wanted to take anything from you." "And the forged signatures," I said, taking a step closer. "Was that also for the family?" Marco's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all. That silence told me everything the words could not. "I did what needed to be done," he finally said, quieter now. "I never meant to hurt you, Damien. I only meant to protect what our father built, what you built, while you were too far away to protect it yourself." I stood there, staring at my brother, feeling something break inside me that I knew would never fully heal. This was not the story of a man protecting a family business out of loyalty. This was the story of a man who had seen an opportunity in my absence and had taken it, slowly, carefully, telling himself the entire time that his ambition was really just devotion. "You lied to me," I said quietly. "Not just about the business, About everything. You let me walk into my own home not knowing my wife had lost our child, not knowing men in my own organization were starting to doubt me, not knowing my own brother was building something behind my back. How long were you planning to keep all of this hidden? Marco did not answer. He looked away, toward the window, his shoulders sagging slightly, and for just a moment, I saw not the confident man who had been running my operations for months, but the younger brother I had grown up protecting, now caught in the weight of choices he could not undo. I am not finished with this conversation, I said, turning toward the door. But I need time before I decide what happens next. And Marco, until I have made that decision, I want you to stay away from Elena, away from the house, and away from every man in our organization. Is that understood? You cannot just push me aside, Marco said, his voice sharp again, some of his earlier confidence returning. I have loyalty in this family now, Damien. Real loyalty, built over months while you were gone. You might not like hearing that, but it is the truth. I paused at the door, looking back at him one final time. We will see about that, I said, and walked out, leaving him standing alone in that quiet office, surrounded by the weight of everything he had built and everything he was about to lose. The days following our meeting at the old office were some of the longest I had ever lived through. I said nothing to Elena about the full extent of what I had discovered, not because I wanted to keep secrets from her the way secrets had been kept from me, but because I needed to protect her from the danger that came with knowing too much too soon. Instead, I focused my energy on quietly rebuilding my understanding of who around me could still be trusted. I reached out to Daniel again, along with 2 other longtime associates, men who had worked beside my father before me, and had never once given me a reason to doubt them. I met each of them separately, in different locations, careful never to let a pattern form that Marco or his new allies might notice. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand the true size of what my brother had built while I was away. It was larger than I had feared. Marco had not simply made a few unauthorized decisions to keep the business running. He had actively courted loyalty from key men within the organization, promising them better positions, larger shares, more respect than they felt I had given them. He had used my absence and Elena's grief as an opportunity to paint himself as the steady hand the family needed, someone who was present when I was not, someone who understood their struggles when I was too far away to notice. The investors, I learned from Daniel, were connected to a rival operation on the other side of the city, one that had wanted access to our territory for years but had never found an opening. Marco had given them that opening, quietly negotiating an arrangement that would benefit him personally once the transition of power was complete, an arrangement that would have left me pushed aside entirely, perhaps permanently, if I had not come home when I did. Sitting with this knowledge felt like carrying a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I had built this life with my own hands, inherited a foundation from my father, and expanded it through years of careful decisions and difficult sacrifices. To learn that my own brother had been quietly dismantling that foundation, while I trusted him completely, was a betrayal deeper than anything I had experienced from an outsider. One evening, Elena found me sitting alone in my office, staring at the ledger without really seeing it. She sat down across from me, her expression gentle but firm, the same expression she used whenever she believed I was carrying too much weight alone. You do not have to tell me everything, she said quietly. But I can see it is eating at you, and I would rather share this burden with you than watch you carry it silently, the way I carried mine. I looked up at her, and something in her words reminded me of my own mistake, the same mistake Marco had made in a different form. I had spent days protecting her from the details, believing silence was kindness, when really, it was just another version of the same secrecy that had already caused so much pain in our marriage. So I told her everything, the rival investors, the men shifting their loyalty, the plan Marco had built to slowly ease me out of my own organization, while wearing the mask of a devoted brother holding things together. Elena listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each new detail, but she did not look away, and she did not ask me to stop. When I finished, she reached across the desk and took my hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I do not know yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to remove him from everything immediately, cut him off completely, the way I would with any man who betrayed me this deeply. But he is my brother, Elena. He sat with you when I could not. Whatever else he has done, I cannot forget that." Elena squeezed my hand gently. "Then do not make this decision out of anger," she said. "Make it clearly, the way you make every important decision. Find out exactly what he has done, exactly who is involved, and decide from there what kind of man you want to be when this is finished." Her words settled something in me that had been chaotic since the moment I found that ledger. She was right. Acting purely from anger would only create more damage, more uncertainty within the organization, more danger for everyone I cared about. I needed to move carefully, deliberately, the same way I had built everything I had ever accomplished. Over the following week, I continued gathering information, building a complete picture of Marco's plan. I discovered that he intended to call a meeting with our most senior men within the month, a meeting where he would formally propose a change in leadership, framing it not as a betrayal, but as a necessary evolution for the family's future. He had already secured verbal commitments from several key figures, promising them positions of greater power once he was in control. I also discovered something else, something that gave me an unexpected advantage. Not every man Marco approached had agreed to his plan. Two of our oldest and most respected associates, men whose loyalty went back to my father's earliest days, had listened to Marco's proposal and quietly declined, choosing instead to wait and see how I would respond once I learned the truth. These men had said nothing to Marco about their doubts, playing along carefully to avoid drawing suspicion, but they had reached out to Daniel, who had reached out to me. Armed with this knowledge, I began to see a path forward, one that did not require the kind of destructive confrontation Marco likely expected from me. If I could demonstrate clearly, publicly, and undeniably that I remained the rightful leader of this family, and that Marco's betrayal was built on deception rather than genuine concern for our future, I could dismantle his plan without tearing the entire organization apart in the process. I called a meeting of my own, scheduled deliberately for the same week Marco intended to make his move. I invited every senior man in the organization, including those I knew Marco had already turned, and I made certain the invitation came with no hint of suspicion, framed simply as my official return to leadership after months away. The night before that meeting, I sat with Elena in our bedroom, going over everything one final time. She had insisted on being present when I confronted Marco publicly, despite my initial hesitation about placing her in the middle of something so dangerous. "I have already lost so much this year," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I am not going to hide in this house while you face my brother-in-law's betrayal alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." I looked at her, this woman who had carried unimaginable grief in silence to protect me, who had found the strength to stand beside me now, even after everything she had endured, and I felt a fierce gratitude that steadied my nerves more than any strategy or plan ever could. "Together," I agreed, and pulled her close, holding on to her as the last quiet moment before everything changed. The following morning, I dressed carefully, choosing clothing that reflected authority without appearing overly formal. A careful balance, I had learned, mattered greatly in moments like this. Elena stood beside me as I prepared, her presence a quiet strength I had not realized I needed until that very morning. As we drove toward the meeting location, my mind ran through every possible outcome, every way Marco might react once he understood. I already knew everything. I had spent years learning how to read people, how to anticipate their next move before they made it, but predicting my own brother's reaction felt different, more painful, more uncertain than anything I had faced in business before. We arrived early, before most of the senior men, giving me time to speak privately with the two associates who had reached out through Daniel. They greeted me with quiet respect, confirming everything I already knew, and pledging their support for whatever decision I made that day. Their loyalty, unwavering despite months of uncertainty, reminded me that not everything Marco had touched had turned against me. One by one, the other men arrived, filling the large meeting room with quiet conversation and the tension that always accompanied significant gatherings within our organization. I watched carefully as Marco entered last, exactly as he had during our previous meeting, his expression composed and confident, clearly unaware that I already understood the full scope of his plan. He took his usual seat near the head of the table, glancing toward me with a look that suggested he still believed he held the advantage in this room. I met his gaze steadily, giving nothing away, and waited for the right moment to begin. When every man had taken his seat, I stood at the head of the table, letting the room fall quiet before I spoke. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I began, my voice calm and steady, carrying easily across the silent room. "It has been a difficult few months for our family, and I know many of you have questions about what happened while I was away, and about what comes next." I saw a few uneasy glances pass between the men, some directed toward Marco, others simply uncertain about where this conversation was heading. Marco himself remained still, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension building in the set of his shoulders. "I learned many things since returning home," I continued. "I learned that my wife endured a painful loss while I was away, alone, because she wanted to protect me from distraction during a dangerous negotiation. I learned that my brother stepped up during that time, making difficult decisions to keep our operations running smoothly. For that, Marco, I am genuinely grateful." I paused, letting those words settle, watching Marco's posture relax slightly, believing perhaps that this meeting would proceed the way he had originally planned, with praise rather than confrontation. I let him believe that for one more moment before continuing. "But I also learned something else," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "I learned that somewhere along the way, protecting this family stopped being the goal. I learned about meetings held in secret, with men from outside our organization, men who have wanted our territory for years. I learned about promises made to some of you in this very room, promises of greater positions and greater shares, made not by me, but by someone acting as though he already held my authority." The room grew tense immediately, several men shifting uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes moving between me and Marco, who had gone completely still, his earlier composure cracking visibly now, under the weight of every eye in the room turning toward him. "Damien," Marco said carefully, attempting to keep his voice level, "this is not the place to discuss family matters." "This is exactly the place," I said firmly, cutting him off, "because this is not simply a family matter anymore, Marco. You made it a business matter the moment you began negotiating with outside investors, using my name and my authority without my knowledge. You made it a business matter when you began promising positions in this organization that were never yours to give." I turned to address the room directly, meeting the eyes of every man present, including the ones I knew Marco had already approached. "I understand why some of you may have listened to what Marco offered," I said, my tone softening slightly, though still firm. "I was gone for months, and doubt is a natural response to uncertainty. I do not blame any man in this room for wanting stability during a difficult time, but I am here now, and I intend to prove, clearly and completely, that this family remains exactly where it has always belonged." Marco stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound sharp in the tense silence of the room. "You think a speech changes anything," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "I was here, Damien. I was here when Elena needed someone, when this organization needed direction, when you were nowhere to be found. These men trust me because I earned that trust while you were gone." "You earned that trust through deception," I said calmly, refusing to match his rising anger with my own. "You told these men I was losing my grip on leadership, while quietly building a plan to remove me from it entirely. That is not earning trust, Marco. That is manufacturing an opportunity, and calling it loyalty." The room remained silent, every man watching this exchange unfold, none willing to speak until they understood clearly where the true power in this room now stood. I saw doubt creeping into some of their expressions, doubt directed toward Marco now instead of me, as the reality of his actions became impossible to ignore. "I have proof," I continued, reaching into my jacket and placing a folder on the table, the same evidence Daniel and the others had helped me gather over the past week. Forged signatures, records of meetings with our rivals, verbal agreements made behind my back, promising positions that were never Marco's to offer. Anyone in this room who wants to examine this evidence is welcome to do so. No one moved toward the folder immediately, but I could see the weight of my words settling across the table, shifting the balance in the room decisively in my favor. Marco looked around at the faces of men he had spent months courting, searching for support that was quickly beginning to disappear. "This is not how loyalty works," I said, my voice steady but firm, carrying the full weight of years spent earning respect through consistency rather than manipulation. Loyalty is not built through secret promises made while someone's back is turned. It is built through years of standing beside someone through difficulty, through honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable, through choosing what is right, even when it would be easier to choose ambition instead. I looked directly at Marco as I spoke my next words, wanting him to understand clearly that whatever affection remained between us as brothers, this decision was not going to be softened by sentiment. "You are no longer welcome in any position of authority within this organization," I said. "You will step back from every operation you have been managing, and you will not approach any of these men again without my direct knowledge and approval." Marco's face went through several emotions in quick succession: anger, disbelief, and finally something closer to resignation, as he realized the room was no longer behind him the way he had believed it to be, only minutes earlier. "You are making a mistake," he said quietly, though the fight had clearly gone out of his voice. "Perhaps," I said, "but it is my mistake to make, the same way this organization is mine to lead, earned through years of decisions you were not present for, built on relationships you did not create. I am not removing you from this family, Marco. You are still my brother, and nothing changes that. But you no longer have a place in the leadership of what our father built, and what I have spent my life protecting." The room remained silent as Marco gathered himself, his shoulders slumping slightly, as the reality of the moment settled over him completely. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly at the threshold to glance back at me, an unreadable expression crossing his face before he disappeared into the hallway beyond. The tension in the room slowly began to ease once he was gone, several men exchanging quiet glances, some clearly relieved that the confrontation had reached a resolution without escalating into something more dangerous. I addressed the room one final time, reaffirming my commitment to the organization, outlining plans to move forward, and thanking each man individually for their patience during a difficult transition. By the time the meeting ended, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief settling over me, the culmination of days spent gathering evidence, confronting betrayal, and standing firm against a threat I had never expected from someone so close to me. As the men filed out, several stopped to shake my hand, expressing quiet reassurances of their continued loyalty, and I accepted each one graciously, understanding that trust, once shaken, would take time to fully rebuild. Elena had waited outside during the meeting, and when I finally stepped out into the hallway, she rushed toward me immediately, searching my face for any sign of how everything had unfolded. I pulled her into my arms without saying a word at first, simply holding her close, letting the events of the past week settle into something more manageable now that the confrontation was finally behind us. "It is done," I said quietly, my lips against her hair. "He is gone from the business. It is finished." She pulled back slightly to look at me, her eyes searching mine carefully. "And between you two," she asked gently, "is that finished as well?" I thought about her question for a long moment before answering honestly. "I do not know," I admitted. "He is still my brother. That connection does not simply disappear because of what he did, but the trust we once had, the kind that allowed him access to everything I built, that trust is gone, and I am not certain it can ever fully return." Elena nodded, understanding without needing further explanation, and together we walked out of that building into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving behind the tension and uncertainty that had defined the past week of our lives. In the months that followed, our lives slowly began to settle into something resembling peace again. The organization stabilized under my renewed leadership, and the men who had once wavered in their loyalty gradually returned to the steady respect they had always shown me before my extended absence. Daniel and the others who had remained faithful throughout the entire ordeal earned greater trust and responsibility, a fitting reward for their honesty during a time when honesty had become rare. Marco disappeared from our lives almost entirely after that day, choosing distance over any attempt at reconciliation, though occasional word reached me through others that he had relocated to another city, attempting to rebuild something of his own away from the shadow of everything he had lost. Part of me still hoped that someday, once enough time had passed, we might find our way back to some version of brotherhood, even if it never resembled what we once shared. But I understood that healing, if it ever came, would need to happen slowly, and only if Marco chose honesty over ambition the next time an opportunity presented itself. Elena and I, meanwhile, found something unexpected growing between us during those difficult months. A deeper connection, built not on the secrets we had once kept from each other, but on the raw honesty we finally allowed ourselves to share. We spent evenings together in the nursery upstairs, no longer avoiding the room or the memories it held, but instead sitting together quietly, remembering the child we had lost, and slowly, gently, allowing ourselves to grieve as partners, rather than as two people carrying separate burdens alone. One evening, several months after everything had settled, Elena found me sitting in that same yellow room, looking at the small stuffed animal still resting on the rocking chair by the window. She sat down beside me, taking my hand the way she had so many times before, and rested her head against my shoulder. "We are going to be okay," she said softly, not as a question but as a quiet certainty between us. I looked around the room, at the crib still wrapped carefully in the corner, at the tiny clothes folded neatly on the shelf, and felt something settle within me that had been unsettled since the night I first walked through that door and discovered everything I had been missing. "We are," I agreed, pulling her closer. Whatever challenges still waited for us ahead, whatever difficulties came with rebuilding trust within my organization or healing the wound left by my brother's betrayal, I understood now that Elena and I would face them together, honestly, without the secrets that had nearly torn us apart. The house that had once felt full of hidden truths now felt like exactly what it was always meant to be, a home built on honesty, resilience, and a love strong enough to survive even the darkest nights either of us had ever faced. A week after the meeting where Marco stepped down, one of the two senior associates who had quietly refused his offer asked to see me privately. His name was Victor, a man who had worked beside my father for over 20 years before continuing to serve under me, and whose judgment I valued as much as anyone's in the entire organization. We met at his home, a modest house on the edge of town, filled with photographs of a family he rarely spoke about, evidence of a full life lived carefully outside the dangers of his profession. He poured 2 glasses of something strong and sat across from me at his kitchen table, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to understand something, Damien," he said. "When Marco came to me with his offer, it was not the promise of power that made me hesitate before refusing him. It was the way he spoke about you, like you were already gone, like your leadership was simply a matter of time before it ended. That is what told me everything I needed to know." I listened carefully, grateful for his honesty, aware that men like Victor rarely spoke this openly, unless they believed the words truly mattered. "Why did you not come to me sooner?" I asked. "Why wait until Daniel reached out?" Victor considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because loyalty built on suspicion is not loyalty at all," he said. "I needed to see how you would handle the truth once you learned it, whether you would react with panic or with patience. The way you called that meeting, the way you presented evidence instead of accusations, the way you gave Marco a chance to explain himself before condemning him, that told me you were still the man your father raised you to be." His words settled something in me that I had not realized was still unsettled, a quiet uncertainty about whether the trust I had rebuilt among my men was genuine or simply the result of fear returning to its familiar place. Victor's honesty reassured me that what I had rebuilt was real, earned through consistency rather than simply through authority. "Thank you," I told him, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could express. "For waiting, for trusting me enough to see how I would respond." "You are your father's son," Victor said, raising his glass slightly in a quiet gesture of respect. "That will always be enough for men like me." I left his home that evening with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding more clearly than ever that leadership was not simply about controlling territory or making difficult decisions under pressure. It was about earning the kind of loyalty that did not waver, even when tested by uncertainty, the kind of trust that men like Victor extended only to those who proved, again and again, that they deserved it. There was one final test still waiting for us, one I had not fully anticipated. About 2 months after Marco's departure, Daniel called me late one night, his voice tight with urgency. The rival group Marco had been negotiating with had not simply disappeared once his plan collapsed. They had invested time and resources expecting a change in leadership, and now that the arrangement had fallen apart, they were unhappy about the outcome. Daniel explained that one of their representatives had reached out directly, requesting a meeting, hinting that they still expected some form of compensation for the opportunity that had been promised to them, and then withdrawn. I recognized immediately that this was not simply a business inconvenience. It was a test of whether the organization I had rebuilt could withstand pressure from outside as steadily as it had withstood betrayal from within. I agreed to the meeting, choosing a public location where both sides could speak without the threat of anything getting out of hand, and I brought Daniel and one other trusted associate along for support. Elena, though worried, understood why I needed to handle this personally rather than delegating it to someone else. Trust, once broken and rebuilt, needed to be reinforced through visible strength, not avoided out of caution. The representative who arrived was a composed, careful woman named Charlotte, who made it clear from the outset that her associates felt they had been misled by promises made on my family's behalf, promises I had never authorized and had no intention of honoring. I listened patiently as she outlined her position, and when she finished, I responded calmly but firmly, explaining that any arrangement made by Marco had been made without my knowledge or consent, and therefore held no legitimacy within my organization. Charlotte studied me carefully for a long moment, clearly trying to determine whether my composure reflected genuine strength or simple bluster. "Your brother made significant promises," she said finally. "My associates do not appreciate wasted time." "Neither do I," I replied evenly. "Which is why I am telling you clearly, in person, that those promises are void. If your associates wish to pursue territory that belongs to my family, they are welcome to try, but they should understand exactly what that would cost them, and exactly who they would be dealing with going forward." There was a long pause before Charlotte finally nodded, seeming to accept, at least for the moment, that pushing further would not be worth the risk. She thanked me for my time, gathered her things, and left, without further threats, though I understood this would not necessarily be the last time our paths crossed. Still, the meeting ended without incident, and driving home that night, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that I had handled the situation the way my father would have, with calm authority rather than unnecessary conflict. When I told Elena what had happened, she listened carefully, then wrapped her arms around me tightly. "You handled that exactly the way you should have," she said. "Firm, but not reckless. I am proud of you." Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. Throughout everything that had happened since my return home, her steady presence had become the anchor that kept me grounded, reminding me that strength was not only about protecting territory or maintaining authority, but about protecting the people and the values that made all of it worth protecting in the first place. As the months continued to pass, life slowly found a new rhythm. The organization grew steadier, under careful, consistent leadership, and the loyalty that had wavered during my absence gradually solidified into something even stronger than before, tested and proven rather than simply assumed. Daniel became someone I relied on more heavily, his honesty during the most difficult weeks earning him a position of greater trust and responsibility within the family. Elena, too, found her own strength returning gradually, no longer carrying grief in isolation but sharing it openly with me, allowing both of us to heal together rather than apart. We spoke often about the future, about hope for a family we might still build together when the time felt right, no longer rushing toward an outcome, but simply grateful for the honesty that now defined our relationship. I had returned home unannounced, expecting nothing more than a quiet reunion with my wife after months away. Instead, I had discovered grief I never knew existed, betrayal from someone I trusted completely, and a strength within myself and within Elena that neither of us had fully understood until it was tested beyond anything we had imagined. What I saw that night changed everything, but in the months that followed, I came to understand that sometimes the truths that break us open are also the truths that finally allow us to heal.